The morning drums stopped beating when they dragged the bodies from Genghis Khan's private tent. Dawn light filtered through the felt walls of the great ordo, catching dust motes that swirled above 500 sleeping women. Guards stood frozen at their posts, leather armor creaking as they turned to watch. The Khan emerged first, his shadow falling across frost-covered grass. Behind him, two figures stumbled into daylight, a young wife from the western tribes, barely 16 winters old, and one of his most trusted generals, a man who'd ridden with him since the Unification Wars. Their wrists were bound with horsehair rope, the traditional binding for those who'd broken the ultimate law. The executioner's stake already stood ready in the center of camp. It always did. Genghis Khan's voice carried across the silent encampment, each word measured and cold. The yasa is absolute for all people in all circumstances. The assembled warriors lowered their eyes. Even battle-hardened men who'd seen cities burn couldn't meet their leader's gaze this morning. The girls' sobs echoed off the mountains. The general said nothing. Both knew their fate had been sealed the moment guards discovered them together in the darkness before dawn. No trial needed, no mercy possible. The law was the law. This was year 20 of Genghis Khan's reign. By sunrise, 2 more bodies would join the hundreds who'd learned that in the Khan's world, control was everything, and everything was controlled. How does a man who united scattered tribes through brilliance and brutality transform into someone who murders his own people for love? You need to understand the journey from a boy named Temujin, kidnapped and abandoned, to the Khan who just ordered those executions. The path leads through from massive tent cities, hundreds of captured women, and a secret law code that turned intimacy itself into a weapon of control. Everything started with a girl named Bort and a promise made in blood. The poison and the betrayal feast tent fell silent except for the sound of Temujin's father gasping for air. Holin watched her husband's face turn purple, his hands clawing at his throat while Totters smiled around their fire. 9-year-old Temujin sat frozen as foam bubbled from his father's lips. The boy who would one day execute lovers at dawn first learned about betrayal while watching his own father die from poisoned mutton. Within days, their world collapsed completely. The same families who'd sworn loyalty to Yasuge abandoned his widow and children on the open steppe. Holin's screams echoed across empty grassland as former allies rode away with the family's horses, leaving 7 children to starve. Temujin dug wild roots from frozen ground while his baby sister cried for milk their mother could produce. Survival meant eating field mice and tree bark. It meant watching his mother prostitute herself for scraps of dried meat from passing traders. The future Khan learned early that promises meant nothing, that loyalty lasted only as long as power did. Each betrayal carved deeper into the boy's understanding of how the world really worked. His half-brother Beggar took the largest portions of their meager food, establishing dominance through fists and threats. When Temujin complained to his mother, she slapped him hard across the face. The eldest eats first. That's how it's always been, but something shifted in the boy's eyes that winter night. Spring brought the confrontation everyone knew was coming. Beggar had taken the last fish Temujin caught. Laughing as the younger boy's stomach growled, the future Khan drew his bow with steady hands, his brother Khazar beside him. Beggar saw them approach across the hillside but didn't run. Perhaps he thought they were still children playing at war. The arrow struck him in the back, puncturing through to his chest. Beggar fell to his knees, blood spreading across new grass while his killers watched. No emotion crossed Temujin's face as his half-brother died. This was simply the restoration of order, the correction of an imbalance that threatened their survival. Holin beat her sons bloody when they returned to camp, cursing them as murderers and kinslayers. But Temujin had discovered something fundamental about himself. Control brought peace. Chaos brought suffering. If maintaining order required violence, then violence became another tool, like hunting or building shelter. The Taishid clan arrived next, led by warriors who claimed Temujin's father owed them horses. They found a teenager already hardened by loss, already learning to trust no one. Iron shackles closed around his wrists as they dragged him from his family's camp. His mother's wails faded into distance as horses carried him towards slavery. Months in captivity taught him about systematic control. The Taishiad kept him in a wooden collar called a kang, parading him through camps as an example. He memorized every guard's routine, every weakness in their watch patterns. The boy who killed his brother for stealing food now studied his captors with a predator's patience. His escape came during a feast, when guards drank themselves stupid on fermented mare's milk. Temujin slipped his bonds and vanished into darkness, the king still locked around his neck. He hid neck-deep in river water while search parties thundered past, holding his breath each time torches swept the banks. An old man named Sorkinshira found him shivering at dawn, the wooden collar cutting bloody grooves in his shoulders. Instead of claiming the reward, Sorkin burned the king and sent Temujin home with a stolen horse, one act of kindness in an ocean of betrayal, filed away for future reference. But home offered no safety. Word spread that the Taishiad's escaped slave had returned. Holin moved their camp constantly, always watching the horizon for dust clouds that meant riders approaching. Temujin practiced archery until his fingers bled, knowing that next time shackles came for him, he'd meet them with arrows. Then came the day that would forge the final piece of his character. Merkid raiders swept down from northern mountains, seeking revenge for an old feud with Temujin's father. The family scattered into tall grass as horsemen circled their camp. Hidden in the reeds, Temujin heard his mother scream as warriors discovered their hiding spot. They took Bort, his young wife of mere months, the girl he'd traveled days to marry, the one person who'd chosen him when he had nothing. Merkid laughter rang across the steppe as they threw her across a saddle. Temujin watched from his hiding place, memorizing each rider's face while his fingers dug into earth. For 3 days, he didn't speak. His brothers tried talking to him, but he stared at the horizon where dust had swallowed Borte's captors. Something fundamental had broken inside the young man who'd already lost father, clan, and freedom. The last piece of his humanity, the part that could still trust and love freely, crumbled as he planned his response. He would get her back, not through pleading or negotiation, but through systematic destruction of everyone who'd taken her. Order would be restored, control would be absolute. But when raiders came for the one person he couldn't afford to lose, something inside Temujin snapped forever. The rescue and the ruleless rescue mission began with a blood oath sworn over burning Volf bones. Temujin cut his palm and let drops fall into the flames while speaking ancient words that bound him to recover what was stolen. His blood brother Jamuka arrived with 200 riders, their horses' hooves thundering across frozen ground. Old Toggle Khan, who owed Temujin's father a debt, brought 10,000 more warriors. The combined force moved like a storm cloud across the steppe. Scouts returned with news that made Temujin's jaw clench. The Merkids had divided Bort and other captives among 3 separate camps, spreading them across valleys to prevent exactly this kind of rescue. His commanders wanted to strike the largest camp first. Temujin overruled them with 4 words that would define his future approach to warfare and control. "We take them all." The attacks came simultaneously at dawn. Temujin led the assault on the eastern camp where intelligence suggested Bort was held. Merkid sentries died with arrows in their throats before they could sound alarms. The camp erupted in screams as riders swept through felt tents, cutting down anyone who resisted. Through the chaos of burning yurts and fleeing horses, Temujin heard a voice that stopped his heart. Borte's scream rose above the battle sounds, not in fear but in rage. He found her in a supply wagon, using a cooking knife to slash at a Merkid warrior trying to silence her. The man's blood sprayed across her face as Temujin's sword separated his head from his shoulders. She didn't recognize him at first. 8 months of captivity had changed them both. Her eyes held a hardness that matched his own, the innocence of their wedding night replaced by something sharper. When recognition finally came, she collapsed against his chest, her body shaking with sobs that sounded more like growls. "Never again," he whispered into her hair. The words carried weight beyond a simple promise. They became law. The ride back to their camp took 3 days. Bort rode beside him in silence, her swollen belly obvious beneath stolen merked robes. Neither spoke about the pregnancy that couldn't possibly be his. The other rescued women whispered behind their hands, but one look from Temujin silenced them. His acceptance of her condition sent a message through the ranks. His woman, his decision, his control, but questions festered like untreated wounds. Warriors who'd fought beside him exchanged glances when Borte's condition became undeniable. Tradition demanded a husband reject a wife who'd been defiled by enemies. Custom required the child be left on the steppe to die. Temujin shattered both expectations with calculated precision. The child arrived during a spring storm that shook their yurt with violent whines. Temujin paced outside while Borte's screams mixed with thunder. His mother Holin emerged hours later carrying a bloody infant, a boy healthy and strong with features that could belong to any steppe warrior. "What will you name him?" Holin asked, watching her son's face for any sign of rejection. Joki, the eldest. The name itself was a declaration. This child would inherit as a true son, regardless of blood. But even as Temujin held the infant, studying features that might or might not be his, something cold settled in his chest. Doubt was another form of chaos, uncertainty bred weakness. The first rules came shortly after, simple edicts that seemed reasonable to warriors still celebrating their victory. No man could touch another's wife, even in jest. Women of the camp would sleep in designated areas watched by guards Temujin personally selected. Any warrior who entered these areas without permission faced immediate execution. His generals accepted these laws as temporary measures, protection for traumatized captives. They didn't see the framework being constructed. Each rule built upon the last, creating walls invisible but absolute. Bort noticed first the way her husband's eyes tracked every man who spoke to her, how his hand tightened on his sword when she laughed at another's joke. "You're building a prison," she told him one night as baby Joki slept between them. "I'm building order," he corrected, his voice carrying that new note of iron. "Chaos took you once. Structure will ensure it never happens again." The transformation accelerated after their second son arrived. Chagatai came into the world with Temujin's unmistakable features, erasing any doubt about parentage, but instead of easing his control, having a certain air only intensified it. Now he had bloodlines to protect, legitimacy to maintain, power to consolidate. New laws emerged weekly. Women couldn't leave camp without escort. Marriages required his personal approval. Adultery became punishable by death for both parties. What started as protection evolved into possession, then into something darker that his people didn't yet have words for. Bort watched her husband change from the boy who'd be hidden in reeds to a man who demanded absolute obedience. She'd survived murked captivity only to find herself in a different kind of cage. The walls were silk instead of rope. The guards were protectors instead of captors, but freedom had become a memory. Late at night, she sometimes wondered if Temujin's transformation began the day they took her, or if the seeds had been planted earlier, when he'd murdered his half-brother, when the Taishi had locked him in the Kang, when his father died choking on poisoned meat. Each betrayal had carved away pieces of his ability to trust, leaving only the need to control. The other wives began arriving once his power solidified, political marriages to cement alliances, captured women from defeated tribes, gifts from subordinate chiefs. Each new addition came with expanded rules, stricter protocols. The simple yurt where Joki was born grew into a complex of tents, then into something larger. Bort remained first wife, but the title meant less as the household expanded. She watched Temujin distribute his attention like a general deploying troops, each interaction calculated for maximum control. Love had become another tool in his arsenal, affection rationed out to maintain order. "Remember when you promised I'd never be taken again?" she asked him after the 10th new wife arrived. "You haven't been," he replied without looking up from maps of future conquests. "No one will ever take what's mine." The distinction cut deeper than any blade. She wasn't protected because he loved her. She was protected because she belonged to him. The boy who desworn blood oaths to rescue her had become a man who collected women like horses, valuable, but ultimately replaceable. Their third son Gedai arrived amid this growing system of control. Then Tului. Each birth expanded Temujin's need for order, for sons meant for potential sources of chaos, for bloodlines that could challenge each other. The laws grew more elaborate, governing inheritance, succession, loyalty. But it was Joki who bore the heaviest burden. The whispers about his parentage never fully died. Temujin's public acceptance couldn't erase private doubts. The boy grew up knowing his every action was scrutinized, his every success questioned. His father's protection came with a price that compounded daily. Years later, when Temujin had become Genghis Khan and the four ordos sprawled across conquered territories, Bort would think back to those early days. The pattern had been so clear in retrospect. Each loss of control had triggered tighter restrictions. Each betrayal had birthed new laws. Each moment of chaos had demanded greater order. She'd been the first, the catalyst that transformed a traumatized young warrior into an emperor who would murder lovers at dawn. Her kidnapping hadn't just stolen 8 months of her life. It had broken something fundamental in the man who loved her, replacing trust with possession, replacing protection with control. The question of Joki's parentage would haunt their family for generations. But it gave birth to something far more terrifying than doubts about bloodlines. It created a man who would write laws in secret, build cities of women, and turn intimacy itself into a battlefield where he could never lose control again. The silent rules, the whispered words spread through Temujin's camp like plague. Warriors huddled around dying fires, passing along memorized fragments of laws their leader scratched onto birch bark in his private yurt. No one dared speak them aloud during daylight. These weren't proclamations announced with drums and ceremony. They emerged from shadows, carried by trusted men who'd proven their loyalty through blood. The first executions came without warning. A young warrior named Belgate had shared his tent with another man's wife while her husband rode on a scouting mission. Dawn brought the sound of stakes being hammered into frozen ground. Belgate's screams lasted until noon, echoing off mountain walls while his lover suffocated beside him, her mouth packed with dirt to muffle her cries. Temujin watched from horseback, his face carved from stone. "The law is the law," he announced to assembled warriors. No one asked which law. No one had seen it written. They only knew that chaos had touched their leader once, stolen what was his, and now order would be maintained through terror. More rules emerged weekly, each more severe than the last. A man who looked too long at another's wife lost his eyes. A woman who met privately with any man not her husband faced the stake. Guards reported conversations, tracked movements, memorized patterns. The camp transformed from a military unit into something else entirely, a community where every glance carried potential death. Temujin's inner circle received the full code first, written in his own hand on scraped hide. They read it by firelight while he watched their faces for any sign of weakness or doubt. The section on women ran longer than all military regulations combined. Who could marry whom, when conjugal visits were permitted, which punishments fit which violations. His generals' hands shook as they memorized statutes that would govern the most intimate moments of their lives. Jamuka voiced what others only thought. "These laws will destroy us from within. Warriors need freedom too." The sentence died as Temujin's blade touched his throat. Warriors need order. I've seen what happens without it. I've paid the price of chaos. His voice carried memories of Borte's swollen belly, of doubts that would never fully die. My people will know certainty. The code grew with each conquest, each betrayal, each moment that threatened Temujin's grip on his expanding world. A captured Chinese scribe taught him proper writing, and suddenly the whispered laws became permanent, carved into wooden tablets that traveled in locked boxes. Scholars would later call this collection the Yasa, the supreme law. But in those early years, warriors simply called them the silent rules, regulations that governed life and demanded death. Women felt the weight first and heaviest. The old steppe freedom where wives could divorce husbands, where widows chose new mates, where daughters rode alongside sons, crumbled under paragraphs of restrictions. Temujin appointed female guards not to protect, but to watch. They reported conversations, monitored friendships, tracked monthly cycles with disturbing precision. His mother Holan watched her son's transformation with growing horror. The boy she'd raised on roots and bark now commanded thousands. But each victory brought new paranoia, fresh laws, tighter control. She found him one night writing by candlelight, his script flowing across hide in neat rows. What drives this? She gestured at stacks of completed statutes. Your father never needed written laws. The old ways. Temujin's stylus never paused. The old ways let them take her. The old ways left us starving. The old ways are dead. Holan studied her son's face, searching for traces of the child who'd once played in tall grass. She found only an architect of order, building walls from words and consequences. You're creating something monstrous. I'm creating something permanent. He set down his stylus and met her eyes. My sons will inherit an empire where the rules are absolute, where no one questions bloodlines because questioning means death, where women are protected because touching them means execution, where chaos can never take root because I've burned away the soil it needs to grow. The irony wasn't lost on those who remembered the kidnapping. Temujin had rescued Bort from captivity only to imprison every woman who followed. His trauma had metastasized into law, spreading through his growing nation like a disease that presented as cure.